大家今天下午来参加我们这一场新加坡的这个非常资深的这个记者跟编辑啊，那也是一个独立网的创办人哈，巴吉先生。刚刚嘉怡已经帮我们介绍了哈，就是简单介绍主持人跟这个我们今天的回应者啊。那我们平常对新加坡的这个状况其实了解不多，所以我想先帮大家做一点点简介哈，就是让大家先对于新加坡整体的这个新闻的状况，以及那个巴吉先生他的一个40年的新闻经历的了解，等一下可能有助于我们聆听这个巴吉先生对于今天的这个主题的一个讨论啊。那这个新加坡，我想大家也都知道哈，它是比较属于这个威权的国家哈。那在无国界记者组织2021年发布的这个新闻自由度里面，在180个国家里面啊，那新加坡排名哈是160名啊，所以呢，它其实是在新闻自由度上面哈是这个受到很多限制的啊。那这个顺便补充一下哈，香港是80名啦哈，那中国大陆是垫底啦哈，那这个台湾大概是在30多名左右哈。那新加坡的媒体呢，基本上呢是2大个企业垄断，那其中一个是由政府所拥有的哈，另一间呢名义上虽然是私人企业，但是实际上呢也都是政府指派的哈，所以呢媒体呢基本上其实是陷入了跟这个政府之间的折冲哈，然后协调甚至有的时候也是挣扎奋斗，那甚至有的时候其实是被政府处罚哈。那随着这个社交媒体崛起哈，我想大家也都注意到，就是这个新加坡在2019年的时候通过了这个认为是史上最严的一个新闻法，对于这个假新闻的处罚哈是非常的重哈。那我想大家也许等一下有机会的话，也可以请教一下巴吉先生哈。因为这个现在这个对于假新闻的问题哈，在这个数位媒体时代，大家都非常的焦虑哈。一方面受到假新闻很大的影响跟冲击，另外一方面大家也在想如何这个报道新闻能够报道真实哈。那真实新闻如何在这样的一个数位媒体假新闻这个散布全球的情况之下哈，我们的出路在哪里啊？好。那这个巴吉先生呢？哈，他有刚刚提到，他有40年的媒体经验，这个新加坡的媒体经验哈，那可以说是这个整个新加坡的一个媒体史哈，他大概都经过了，从平面媒体哈、电视哈到网络媒体。那现在他自己也独立创办了一个就是网络媒体，叫做独立报哈。我想大家可以看出巴吉先生他的愿望哈，对于新闻专业的坚持哈跟努力。那要特别跟大家介绍的是呢，他在2020年的时候呢，还出版了一本新书，好，就等于2年前哈。那这本新书的名字呢叫做 Reluctant Editor， 好，就是中文也许可以翻成一个不情愿的编辑啊。那为什么 reluctant 呢？为什么那么不情愿呢？哈，那透过他这个资深的这个新闻工作者啊，包括记者、包括主编，好这样的经验哈。那其实也就是记录了新加坡的这些媒体专业工作者怎么样跟政府之间的这种折冲、挣扎甚至冲突啊。那他提到说，其实呢，这是一个充满了风险甚至是危险的生涯。那有些人因此丧失了工作哈，有些人被迫离开了新加坡，那也有些人暂时屈服了，也许为在明天可以继续奋斗啊。好，那简单的跟大家先做一个勾勒哈，就是新加坡的媒体的状况跟巴吉先生哈，他在这个新加坡这样的一个长达40年的这个媒体的这个工作经验哈，他也是当前大概新加坡里面哈最知名的这个媒体人物之一啊。那今天的主题呢，我们请他谈的呢是在这个新媒体时代的新闻伦理啊。那巴吉先生虽然非常资深哈，但是他自己也创办新媒体，还担任了这个很多媒体的一些顾问哈，这个 consultant 哈。那所以他这个经历非常的丰富。那而且呢，我想大家从刚刚的介绍，你们可以看得出来，他对于新闻专业的这种坚持哈跟奋斗。那今天的这个题目里面，他会提到新闻专业哈，如何去处理这样的这个假新闻错误的问题哈，如何在这个中间这个 去报道真实，以及商业对于这些新闻这个报道的这个伤害哈。那我们今天刚刚也提到哈，回应人哈是这个新加坡的这个海峡时报也是一个英文媒体啊。那这个的驻台记者哈，那我们在前面的那一场次里面，我们听到这个请到了这个国际新闻台湾的这个国际新闻联谊会的杨浩伟先生哈，他提到说。那这个目前呢，其实很多的国际媒体在台湾都有驻台的记者，甚至是专职的记者啊。那其实我们也看到雨静哈，魏以俊小姐，她其实很之前哈，她只有3年的经验而已啊。所以我想可以对照那个刚刚巴吉先生40年的经验哈，我们可以看到2个不同的世代哈，对于这个新加坡媒体的这样的一个现况的，以及这些这个所谓的我们的这个主题新闻伦理哈的一些回应哈。那好，我想那个非常欢迎他们2位哈。那我们这个时间上面，我们的这个专题的报告哈，就是请巴吉先生的报告有1个小时哈。那大家这个可以在我们这个 Zoom 的会议室里面有留言区哈，大家有问题可以先提出。等一下到了这个问题时间的时候呢，大家也欢迎大家哈可以举手发问哈。那我们这边都会有后台的工作者哈，好像是嘉怡哈来帮忙我们这个安排这个回应的这个问题等等哈。好，那我们现在是不是就开始？那就请巴吉先生好吗？谢谢。
Thank you very much. First, I have a kind of an apology to make because I woke up today and I had a bit of a sore throat, but it's better now. I have tested for COVID. It shows negative, so I'm okay. But so my voice is still a bit not as soothing as it always is. And second point I want to make is that this I have prepared this talk mainly as a holistic talk, holistic in the sense of ethics, and I'm not really concentrating on Singapore, but I'm concentrating on the kind of the world of media. But that doesn't mean that I won't speak about Singapore media, which is my favorite topic. But you can ask me any questions, either as I'm talking or after I finish. I won't get angry if you stop me halfway. So let me start. First, let me say that a bit of history about journalism. When I started journalism in 1970, not 1917, 1970. So you can kind of guess my age. And also I was just 21 years old. 21 years old. I stayed on in the job for nearly 40 years. It was my first and last real job. Like me, excuse me, many jumped into the profession. Many of my ex-colleagues who eventually became friends, they came in together with me with lofty ideals to expose wrongdoings, to be a watchdog, to protect the rights of ordinary citizens. That was how we started out. Of course, we didn't achieve all that. Sometimes we achieved, sometimes we didn't achieve, but it's always good to have ideals in your life. And ethics was of paramount value to us. As time wore on, my friends and I in the profession found that we had to give up some of our ethical ideals. It's in a way, it's kind of natural, because you, as a young-blooded youth, you do things, you have ideals, but they don't necessarily. Just give me one moment because my battery is running low. Just give me one moment. Yeah, so we came in, as time wore on, we were, my friends and I found that we had to give up some of our ideals, you know. I call it ethical ideals. But we still pressed on because we hoped to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It is not that fighting for ethics was a waste of time. It was not a waste of time. It was something that had to be done, and we did it. You know? There was an occasion in 1990. Sorry. Yeah. There was an occasion in 1991 or 1992 when my belief in journalism ethics was put to the test. This is a very personal example. Let me just take a couple of minutes to explain that what actually happened. In 1992, I was working for a newspaper called the New Paper, and one of our best reporters had come back. Oh no, sorry. The Ministry of Defense issued a small one-paragraph report which talked about a helicopter crash in one of its naval bases. It's the Super Puma helicopter. And our reporter had a lot of details about the crash. Where was the helicopter going to? How many people were involved in the crash? And exactly where it landed. I was the editor of the New Paper then. Just became editor 2 years before that. And of course, it was a great story. And we published the full details that the reporter had. I was very convinced that he had all the right details. And he proved me right. You know? But the Ministry of Defense was very upset. They asked me and the reporter, the permanent secretary, to go and meet him and said, you have to tell us who your source is. Both the reporter and I refused to. We went back to our office. A few days later, we were called in again to tell Ministry of Defense who the source was. Of course, we refused a second time, and we were threatened with court action. Well, we realized what we are in, what kind of a situation we are in. We still resisted the pressure from the Ministry of Defense to reveal the source. And strangely, nothing happened. They didn't take us to court. I till today, this happened in 1992. Till today, I don't know what prompted the government not to take us to court. So, but when I think about it, not that often, but occasionally, when I think of that incident, I still don't know really why I did what I did, which is not to reveal the source. Maybe it was because the journalists of my generation believed that revealing the name of the source was too deep a cut, and the consequences can be immense. You know? When I meant immense, I meant like, you know, who will trust the media again? who will want to talk to the media because they will give the information to the government. And people may not trust journalists anymore and may not talk to us anymore. So that was, but again, looking back, I'm glad that we made that decision not to reveal the source. And if we were going to lose our jobs, that's fine. But if we were to be charged in court, I'm not sure what the punishment will be. In a way, I and the reporter were prepared for it. So taking off from there, I would argue that those instances of, I mean, that is in a more larger context. It's also ethics, right? Ethics of the profession. I would argue that ethics at that time was very important to us. But I would argue now that ethics is even more important. Ethics in journalism is even more important because of the pressures the market forces put on journalists and media management. Let me just explain what this media market, I mean, what are the pressures? I think most of us know that journalism is around the world is under attack. Many newspapers have been closed down. Many are losing money. Some have done pretty well, like the New York Times and the Financial Times. And but generally, it's like a kind of a doomsday scenario. And as I said earlier just now, that because the market pressures are so great, the value of ethics becomes even more important. And why do I say that? Because everybody who is trying to put pressure on media and trying to get them to report the way they want, whether it is government, in some countries like Singapore, government is one of the biggest advertisers, and that's where the money comes from. Whether it is government or whether the big advertisers, the banks, insurance companies, and things like that. So there is a tremendous pressure on media to not, I won't say to ignore ethics, but to have to spend time in taking care of so many other things that ethics is kind of pushed somewhere to the tail end. I was, let me just talk, ethics again as an example. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has cast the spotlight on a media that is very stretched to the extremes, because many of them have to put boots on the ground, and they don't have the kind of resources anymore as they used to have, as, let's say, CNN had during the first Gulf War. Because they want to give readers and viewers not just the news, but also the analysis. And to give analysis, you need journalists who know the situation well, who know the dynamics well, who know the dynamics of Russia and Ukraine well. And this is not just Russia and Ukraine. This is also US involvement, Europe's involvement, and not to mention China's involvement in some way. So talking about BBC, coming back to BBC, and I was watching BBC at the height of the Ukraine war nearly every day, and I must say they did a pretty good job, But there were also some fault lines, like when they used a photograph of a bombed building at the tail end of one report, and BBC said that the picture and what the incident has not been independently verified. Independently verified. That's the exact term that they use. So my question to you and to myself is, should they have screened the shot at all? If it has not been independently verified, then why show it? No. So what are you trying to do? So my answer to that question that I asked, should it have been screened at all, is that it's a yes, but there's a qualifier. And the qualifier is that they had a qualifier about that it was not being independently verified, but it was that language or that phrase was so shall I say, put in small font, which I'm not sure how many people would have noticed it and just went out. Maybe they should have done it much more prominently. And especially in a war situation, those who have covered wars know, it is nearly impossible, maybe impossible, to get to the truth. And if the media always says, okay, we will have to get to the truth before we report, they may not have any report to send out. Whether it's newspapers or TV. TV even worse because it's more instantaneous, right? And so now that I've given you a certain picture of ethics about when I was a journalist in 1922, and what kind of pressures there were, but also what kind of journalists we had. Let me now move a bit, move forward a bit more to the present situation. And in this present situation, let me warn you that I'm now trying to be a bit provocative. The journalism crisis is partially caused from within the newsrooms. I know many journalists are going to get very angry with me on this, but please listen to me. And I've said this a number of times, and sometimes I feel journalists are their worst enemies. Let me explain. They have become, not during my time, but now, many of these journalists think very high and mighty about themselves, that they can destroy a person, they can destroy a country, they can destroy a company. And they think they're always right. So I have had experience with so many journalists in the last maybe 10, 15 years of not double checking their facts, right? We would never have that. I'll just give you one quick example. When I was a young reporter in early 1970s, and I was a crime reporter at that time, and I had a report, or I had a contact from the mortuary calling me to tell one of the top wrestlers, because at that time wrestling was a very powerful sport, which had a lot of followers. And that contact told me, and I trusted the contact, it was a very good contact, told me that this famous wrestler called King Kong had died. I trusted him so much. So I went to my news editor and I told him, King Kong has died. He looked at me, sneered at me and said, are you sure? Famous words of a news editor, are you sure? I said, yeah, my contact told me. He said, did you actually verify? Did you double check? Just listening to one person is not good enough. Never rely on one source. And this happened many years ago, 30 or more than 30 years ago. And I still remember it because of the importance of checking your facts or double checking your facts. So I went back to my contact in the mortuary and I told him, hey, my news editor told me to check it again. Is there any way I can check? So he said, okay, you don't trust me, right? You come into the cold room. Took me to the cold room, opened the fridge door, and he showed me, this is King Kong. And written there is his name, his age, and some other details, which I dutifully took down. And the story became such a great hit. So the fact is, I don't know how many news editors do that kind of double checking, that kind of scrutiny on the reporter's job. And I learned. It's a lesson I will never forget. Although my contact was right, still the fact that you had to check your facts is so important. And many of the journalists today, I'm sure the younger journalists will frown on some of the things I'm saying. They believe in their version of the truth. Even, this is where the danger is, even when things are pointing to the contrary. You know, so it's I don't know what it is. Is it because the young are in a rush? Or is it because they have not come through the mill and learned hard lessons and learned and given the hard knocks? It could be anything. So I had an editor-in-chief who used to tell us there are only 3 things that you need to worry about. And the 3 things are accuracy, accuracy, and accuracy. How right he is. You know? No, but also at that time, let me go back to the bit into the past. The King Kong affair, the wrestler affair, those were boom times. I mean, I've never seen the kind of advertisements that the Straits Times can draw in. I don't see that happening anymore. Maybe not during my lifetime. So it was the commercial part of it. Then there were also the journalism part of it. Many of you will remember, all of you will remember, the expose, Washington Post expose of Nixon and what he did to the Democratic Party headquarters and how Washington Post exposed him and finally led to his resignation. And I think that gave, I feel that kind of journalism, which is very good, also gave many journalists and the chance or the will to push the envelope with the intention of bringing down governments and intention of bringing down corporations. Not many of them succeeded because not every government is like the Nixon government. I wonder, preparing for this talk, I wonder if the word ethics even feature in our newsrooms now. I wonder, because I don't have any inside knowledge. The newsrooms that are being buffeted by the pressure of making the news business work just to stay afloat. You have to spend so much of time. Newspapers are folding up, I told you. Others are losing money, forcing them to look at other sources of revenue. And journalists are in the thick of the chase for the dollar. In fact, if you look at, I can talk about it in greater detail if you want, But if you look at the SP, Singapore Press Holdings, which publishes the Straits Times, some of the most talented journalists have been taken away and subsumed and made part of the marketing team. I'm not sure whether there are other newspapers like that or other media organizations like that. I don't know what actually the reason is. Maybe it's because journalists are liked by advertisers. You can go and talk to the advertisers. Maybe because these are journalists who can also give them some idea of how the newsroom works. Or maybe it also showed the quality of the marketing people in SPH. So when you take away some of the most talented people from the newsroom to spend time in the to work in the marketing teams, I think that already affects your newsroom. And something has to give. Or to put it another way, so what takes a backseat? Does journalism take a backseat because we have lost some good people? I say issues like ethics, balance in reporting, talent recruitment are slowly becoming, at least from the media organization, are slowly becoming foreign words. I don't think that kind of emphasis is being paid to the real journalism. Let me give you a kind of a peek into the newsroom, today's newsroom by the editor of the Boston Globe. And this is what he said. We can no longer afford to be the paper of record. He's already saying we have to move out. We cannot keep doing this. Oh, this happened, that happened, this happened. He said we need to be a paper of interest. What interests people, or what to make people interested in. There is this is again quoting the Boston Globe editor, there is an incredible competition for people's time and their pockets. And their attention is being moved. And if the Globe is not interesting, searingly relevant, provocative, on a day-to-day basis, we are not going to survive as a news organization. Let me read that paragraph again. If it is not interesting, the media, if the newspapers, TV stations, whatever, online media, if they are not interesting, then we are not going to survive as a news organization. We have to be interesting, we have to be relevant, and we have to be provocative. Some people may disagree with words like provocative, but that's his way of redefining news in media. Actually, journalists, I mean, I'm so glad that I'm not in journalism anymore, because it's a damn tough job now. On one hand, you have your paper's survival, which is at stake. And on the other side, you have to bring in as many good stories as possible. Readership is declining. You have to push up the readership to stop the decline. So actually, journalists have this unenviable task of churning out products. I use the word product because there's no more newspapers, right? Podcasts and others, right? That don't just give you the news, but also the context of the news. I find there are still many newspapers that still follow the old dictum, which is just give the news, which is when, what, where it happened, or how it happened. But the context of the news is becoming more and more important. Do I want to get a paper in the morning which tells me that war has broken out in Ukraine when I already saw it on TV? What do I want? I want an analysis. I want certain questions answered. Why did the Russians do this? Why Ukraine? What did Ukraine do wrong? And those kind of things. And look at the whole Putin, for example. If it were not Putin, if it was some other leader, would that leader have done this? So the context to the news becomes very, very important. And it's not easy to give a context because not many journalists, especially the younger ones, have context. So they have to start training journalists, change their mindset. The news is now different. The TV will run with it, the social media will run it. Do we want to repeat that? After some time, you'll become old, right? And people may not want you anymore. And that is at one level, which is a very important level. Then you have the journalists have to do podcasts, not just writing reports. They have to do videos. They have to, of course, write their articles. And as a friend said, videos must be of movie quality. Interactive graphics. All these have to be now not totally done by the journalist, but he has to get involved. And he has also got to do news stories, right? The stories for the paper or for the TV station. A Southeast Asian journalist said in his blog last week, I quote him, "Quality journalism is no longer enough." I repeat, quality journalism is no longer enough. Newsrooms will have to devote an even larger amount of resources and manpower on packaging a story in a way that could get the hundreds of thousands of clicks and likes. So, I mean, I think I should read that quote again. He's a Southeast Asian journalist. Quality journalism is no longer enough. Newsrooms will have to devote an even larger amount of resources and manpower on packaging a story in a way that could get hundreds of thousands of clicks and likes. I'm not sure whether I've been all negative or painting a very dark picture, but let me also say it is not really all that bleak and blurry. News organizations like NYT and the Financial Times are shining a torch in a dark tunnel. They have merged digital journalism with old form journalism in a way that is showing what is possible. But I'm convinced that this is not the end of the story. There will be more developments coming. And I'm a great fan of the Financial Times, especially the weekend edition. I enjoy reading it. And that is mainly because of their writing, and also because of the contextualizing of their news. So as media sinks further into a dark hole of talent shortage, money squeeze, declining readership, digital competition, let me just put out some realities for all of you, including myself, to ponder. First point I want to make is that journalism has and will continue to be a very important profession. It's equivalent, I say, to national service, the military service, to defend your turf, not just defend your turf, but defend your country. There may be occasion. The professions need to survive and even prosper. Every which way, must be found to keep it going. So that's my first point. Second point is businessmen, intellectuals, and many others who have the resources, who have the interest, who believe in journalism's true values. They need to find ways to help journalism survive. And of course, one of the ways is what has now come to be known as philanthropy journalism, which the Guardian newspaper in London has been doing for a long time. They have set up a trust, and that trust gives money to the journalists to produce good newspapers. Third point, duty of journalists is to produce good reports, videos, podcasts that will meet the taste of the reader and the viewer. And that taste keeps changing constantly, which means the journalist has to change. He has to understand the reader better. Let me quote what Lionel Barber, the former editor of the Financial Times, has written a book, which is I would recommend. It's a good read, and he says there are two things that he identified in the book. Going digital is very, very necessary. We have to push for it. Second one is get good talent. When he became editor, I think in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, he went out getting some of the best talent available in the market. Two of them, Martin Wolf and Gillian Tett, are still there. They produce some very good reports. They're very respected, not just in the profession, but outside the profession. So the fourth point, that's the third point. The fourth point is as I said earlier, I mean, it's not a fourth point, it's an addition to the third point. Lionel Barber, when in his book, The Powerful and the Damned, showed how he single-mindedly, he identified these two issues for the paper, and he went out and he made sure that he got the right people. He also spent a lot of his time in making sure that the paper went into the digital world and succeeded. Lionel Barber, the author, the former editor of the Financial Times, opened multiple media fronts: print, online, social media, podcast journalism, because just relying on print alone would mean disaster. He knew that. Fifth, I come to the fifth point, which is the final point. The heady days of record-breaking profits are over for media. I can say that for sure. Media companies have to come to grips with the new reality. And as I glance through newspapers from all parts of the world, I get the impression that they have still not come to grips with it, because it is not easy. It's not easy to change the mindset, of people of your own journalists. And getting to do all the other work is not easy. It's very difficult. It's like moving a mountain. So that, and they have to come, the media companies have to come to grips with the new reality. The new reality is smaller profit, maybe no profits at all. Understanding readers' taste, which is a Herculean task. And as I said, the reader's taste will change and will change very fast. So these 2 points will become very, very important for media. Now let me round up and say, if I've given a very negative view of media, let me bring it back to a bit more of a positive side, and that is journalism is very important for a country's intellectual and emotional growth. Its role, if played responsibly, the key word is responsibly, helps in the nation's development and even success. Without a good media, without a responsible media, without the type of media that is needed now, you would find that a country is not really going to prosper. So I'll stop here and I will wait for any questions or comments.
OK， 听到声音了哈。好，谢谢，非常谢谢巴吉先生哈，给我们的这个他的非常资深的哈这样一个对于新闻业当前的面临到的一个困境了哈，或是说一种数位时代、网络时代的一些堕落的现象哈。那但是他还是苦口婆心的哈。那这个从他的这个自身经验里面哈，这个勉励大家，我们还是要做好的报道、真实的报道哈、深度的报道哈。那这个才是一个好的新闻人哈、好的新闻业哈能够存活之道，而不是淹没在这些快速、及时哈这样的一个网络的这些乱象中吧哈。好，那我们看看大家对于巴吉先生的这个刚刚的这个报告哈，这些观察哈，大家有没有什么问题就不要客气，尽量提出来哈。那我看一下哈，我们请嘉怡帮我们 Q 一下好不好？这个有一些问题对不对哈？那你帮我们 Q 一下，看看请哪一位问题你先提哪一个问题，然后我们可以这个先
要不要请宇静先回应，然后我们再来集中问问题。
哦，好的，谢谢，好，那我们先请宇静先回应一下哈，来，那请宇静好吗
？Hello, hi, Mr. Balji. Yeah, I think that was really interesting.
好，请说。
Oh, sorry, 这样听得到吗？
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, so I have been in journalism for about 10 years, but working for a Singaporean outlet, as far as that goes, I'm pretty inexperienced with only 3 years with the Straits Times. I think everything you said was really interesting, you know, especially I had no idea that my company had put a number of talented journalists into the marketing team. I think because the Straits Times is a really old paper, it's got, I think, 176 years of history. So compared to Taiwan, where press freedom is still relatively new and young, there's quite a lot of history with newspapers in Singapore, but with the scale of freedom that journalists are given in Singapore, it's quite the opposite. Like Ms. Chang had mentioned earlier, Taiwan is ranked number 38 in the Press Freedom Index this year. It was released a couple of weeks ago, and Singapore falls about 100 places behind that. So they're ranked at 139. With ethics, I believe Singapore does, or at least the Straits Times, I see that they do put a little more resources into fact-checking, pretty straightforward facts. My copy goes through about 3 different rounds of copy editing and fact-checking with different editors. But well, that's something that's more rare in Taiwan, I feel. In Taiwan, people put more emphasis on turning out copy as fast as they can to rush deadlines to get breaking news out. So a lot of the time, you see slip-ups from journalists, and that has gotten the Taiwanese journalism industry into kind of a bad reputation. But with Singapore, something that's I find a little restricting is how some topics are not touched upon, especially as a correspondent staying in a place where press freedom is so encouraged. For instance, the Singaporean government doesn't want us to talk that much about, let's say, LGBTQ issues. So there was some limit on me personally when I wanted to report on the same-sex marriage laws that we had passed a few years ago, and then the follow-ups that happened a year after that. So I think that's kind of a pity, but as a journalist, it was really interesting for me to kind of straddle these two sides and try to maintain kind of a balance without really sacrificing the honesty of my reporting. Yeah, I think that's what I initially wanted to share, and maybe we can open the floor up to questions.
Well, is there a question?
No, I don't have questions.
But you did mention something about media ranking, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, press
and where
freedom
Singapore
index.
stands and where the others stand, right? Let me say something about that. I think we in the world press freedom, right? Press freedom index. Let me say that the emphasis on press freedom is important. I'm not saying no, but equally important is the responsibility of the press. Will anybody do a survey and come out with an index and say which are the more responsible media? I would like to know. As I said, I'm not against media press freedom. I think press freedom is important, but what about responsibility? The other side of the coin. Don't you want to become just for the sake of freedom, you do whatever you want, or you want to practice freedom with responsibility? How many media does that? I'm not very sure. The newspapers that I read, I think FT does that very well, Financial Times. The others I'm not so sure. I don't read them that much. So I think BBC tries to do it, not always successful, but it still tries. So I think we should really relook this whole thing of press freedom, and look at also responsible press. Yeah, that's my take.
好的，我想刚刚那个巴吉先生的回应里面哈，也回应了他原来的那个这个演讲后面的最后的一个结论哈，就是他认为媒体的责任里面哈，有一块呢是要这个帮助国家发展哈，帮助国家更好的发展哈，而不只是只享受所谓媒体的自由而已哈，这样的自由可能不见得对整体社会，我想他的意思是这样是好的哈。我想这个部分哈，新加坡在这个他的这个李光耀争取在面对这个世界对他的这个新闻自由的批评上面哈，那他曾经在联合国发表过演讲，也有很重要的一个主张，就是媒体是应该对国家的发展负责的哈。好，想那这是一个 国家发展也需要监督啦，哈，那监督就需要自由言论媒体，哈，像这里面确实是有一个如何掌握这个平衡的问题，哈，或是如何定义国家发展，哈，那怎么样才是对？那这边可能大家也会有一些问题，哈，我们是不是来开放现场的朋友们提问，好吗？
对，
然后我们再请那个巴吉先生跟也许那个也可以一起回应哈。好，来请说那个好，嘉义帮我们 Q 一下。
我们看一下那个我们德国之声李宗宪先生哈有提一个问题，他说就是问那个巴吉先生，就是在新加坡经营独立媒体的挑战嘛，因为李宗宪他有注意到那个 Online Citizen，The Online Citizen 这家那个网媒哈遭到撤照。那因为那个巴吉先生他自己也经营这个独立网，哈，他有一个自己办的新媒体。那他有遇到什么困难吗？就是说，是不是新加坡的社会或是新加坡的政府对于这种调查报道，好，会不会有什么刁难这样子？那就是像那 The Online Citizen 被撤照这件事情，那这是不是这个小的独立媒体网媒都有类似的困难吗？想请教这个德国之声的李宗宪先生，想要请教巴吉先生。
Okay. Let me talk about the so-called independent media. I don't really consider any media independent. So they always have some kind of vested interest somewhere. First point. Second point is that the biggest challenge, as far as I'm concerned, for online media, independent media in a country like Singapore is resources. You cannot run a newspaper or you cannot run an organization, a news organization, or even an online organization without good resources. If you are going to get people who are going to work for you on a part-time basis, I mean, how much can you do? As I said in my talk earlier, that talent is so important in today's world. So where is the talent coming from? Without that, you're going to make mistakes. There's no people to check you in the newsroom. I mean, the mainstream media, right? Like the Straits Times, for example. I mean, they have people who are there who have been trained to check your copy. Even then, they fall down. You know? So that is, to me, is the biggest challenge for an online media. You know? Unless they can get good, convince Singaporeans with money, corporations with money, fund us. And this is what we will do for you. I've not seen that happening, and I don't see that happening in the near future. Because, you know, either these organizations believe that the Singapore government is the best government in the world, so we don't need a check on the government. So why do we have to spend our money trying to develop an alternative media, which I think is wrong. Because one day you are going to face a situation where you say, hey, why our media is so bad, right? And in a way, the Straits Times has already kind of faced that. And I'm not sure how many of you know, the Straits Times used to be such a successful newspaper from a business point of view. I was part of that group many years ago, so I can speak with a lot of confidence of the kind of success it was. And it was successful mainly also apart from that kind of journalism that was practiced at that time, but also because the government made sure that the Straits Times, for example, would make a lot of money and will then support the Singapore government. It was a very smart move by Lee Kuan Yew. Make sure that there was no competition to the Straits Times. The competitors who came up, some of very good newspapers like the Singapore Herald, for example, had to be folded because Singapore Herald was accused by Lee Kuan Yew of running black operations in the country. So the Straits Times was wildly successful. And if I were running the Straits Times, the business manager of Straits Times or the CEO of Straits Times. I said, this is a good government. We are making a lot of money because of this government. Why should I go against the government, right? Having said that, now times have changed, right? Digital media has come in. And one very important factor or fact about the Straits Times, which is not that very well talked about, is that the CEO of Straits Times or SPH, and he was a CEO for 15 years, he never did anything to bring digital in. And time was lost. By that time, Facebook and Google had all come in, and to now move them out is impossible. Right? So why is it that that CEO never kind of lifted a finger to change the business model? So I mean, that's a kind of a side issue. But the Straits Times is now gone. The government is now giving money to the Straits Times. It is no more a listed company. It has been hived off and called Singapore Media Trust, I think. And it's getting $180 million a year from government. From government means from taxpayers, right? So we will see. It's just started. The scheme has just started. What will be the incentive for the journalists to work hard, for the management to work hard? We'll see. And so the Singapore media example is something that is really worth watching. Yep.
好的，
张老师，我们有一个举手发言的，有一个举手想要发言的那个。
OK，那就现场举手，要先请他先讲。
是那个温洪恩先生，请你打开你的麦克风就可以发言了。好，那个温先生现在把手放下来了。那这样子，我们那个林丽云老师有一个问题，他是用英文写在那个聊天板上哈，我直接把它印出来，我直接把它念出来。
念一下哈。
好，to Mr. PM Budget, how many independent media are there in Singapore? Does the Singapore government exert pressure on independent media? What kind of strategy can independent use to resist the government's control and to gain support from the readers?
When you say independent, you're talking about the independent media, right?
Yeah, independent media.
The one that I used to be involved in.
Yeah.
Is that the one you're talking about?
And or the other independent
media.
Okay.
So it's a combination. The other which are mainly on the online. Right? Let me just give you a bit of a history. There are two media groups in Singapore, big media groups. Until recently, the Singapore Press Holdings was a public listed company, but the government controlled Singapore Press Holdings via various means. One of them is by law, which is a law that came into force in 1974, Newspaper Presses Printing Act, which said that the government can revoke your license and not renew it. The license is given by the government to you every year. You have to renew it every year. And I can decide not to renew it, and nobody is going to ask a question. So that was that law hanging over an organization like the Singapore Press Holdings. Then, this is I call it a very, very sophisticated management of media in Singapore. Then the shareholding, SPH, Singapore Press Holding shareholdings, is done in such a way that created a management shareholding group, but they had huge influence over who is the editor of the paper. And these people who are management shareholders were all pro-government people. So you know which way they will go in selecting the editor of the paper. There have been at least one case where the board, which, as I said, you know, they had management shareholders there, went to the editor-in-chief and told the editor-in-chief, I think your deputy is ready to take over. And this editor-in-chief was only about 52 years old. That's not the time for him to retire. Of course, they didn't like what he did. In another case, in 2011, I think, election, they were very unhappy with the way the Straits Times, they mean the government, was very unhappy with the way the Straits Times covered the elections. All the editor did was to give it as fair and equal coverage to the ruling party and the opposition party. Of course, that was not good for the Singapore government, and he lost his job as editor of the Straits Times, and they brought in somebody else to run the newspaper. So these are things that hang over the heads of many journalists. They know that if this can happen to them, it can happen to us, right? And so there are all these little things there. And finally, I must also say, to the credit of the Singapore government, that they make and they take an enormous amount of time to talk to journalists privately over lunch and try and convince them why certain things have to be done their way. And I've attended some of these meetings, and let me tell you that they have very, very good arguments. Not easy to dispute them. So you have a system of law, you have a system of management, then you have a system of the government from the Prime Minister downwards trying to convince the editors and the journalists that this is the right way to do it. So it's a kind of a multifaceted way of controlling the media. Let me come to the independent media. So in this situation with the Straits Times and I didn't tell about the other part. The SPH is one. Then the other is of course Media Corp, which is owned by Temasek Holdings, and it's a government company. So you would with these two established long time in Singapore and having a control of the market over a long period of time, for somebody to come in is not going to be easy unless they have the resources, they have the money. If you just come in and want to make an impact, the only way, and some of them have tried it, is to just be anti-government. And being anti-government is fine, but you must get your facts right. And when you don't get your facts right, that's when the government goes after you, using POFMA and using other things. But who will join an independent media when they can't pay? Where are they going to get the talent? Yeah, some people will come, but they are not the type of journalists I think the independent media wants. So they have to struggle. They have to go and talk to businessmen and see what they can get. Yeah. I hope I have answered the question.
是林老师有在那个会议室里，林老师要不要再补充？
直接问一下。
Yeah, I can ask. Can you hear me? 有听到吗？
要再大声一点，声音不是很清楚。
Yeah, you can hear me, right? Hello.
Yes.
Okay, great. Actually, my question is very specific. The online citizen was revoked by the government. And the main reason was that the online citizen failed to report the financial situation of the media. That is, he failed to report the list of donations of the donators. And the argument of the online citizen was that because the donators could be in danger if the online citizen reveal their backgrounds. But the government simply think it is important to know the background or the financial situation of the online media. And do you think it's reasonable or not?
That's a very, very specific question. Are you a journalist?
No, actually, I'm an academic.
Ah, okay. Okay, now I know where you come from. Let me try, and I want to try and answer that question as specifically as I can. And that is, first point, that the closure of online citizen, that was the immediate cause, right? But the people who are watching the online citizen, people like me, for example, already knew that the online citizen will not survive because of money problems, because of couldn't get the good talent. And you could see in some of the reports that they were just going for their pound of flesh. So that is something that was already happening. Then, of course, the government asked for them to reveal the source of the donor, who the donor is. Online citizens said they were not going to. And of course, that's a rule that they have to. And not to forget also this, the battle between the online citizen and the government has been going on for a long time. In fact, Online Citizen is the first serious, independent, online newspaper, the first one. So this has been going on for a while. And the government wanted to, and the government at one stage even declared it a political association, which then meant that they had to reveal their donors if the government asked. Of course, the Online Citizen refused to, and the government didn't close it. The Online Citizen itself decided to shut down because it was already very painful for them. There are many details about this story, which you need to go and research and find out. But I think the government wanted to get rid, let me be very upfront. The government wanted to get rid of the Online Citizen because it was a thorn on their side. Not that the Online Citizen, at least in my view, was making a big impact. I use the word big on the audience. And elections were not lost because of online online citizens reporting. But maybe the government thought this could get worse. So they decided to use this tactic to see whether they will reveal their source. But my point is, my question really is, what is the problem in revealing your source? The source of the funding. You already knew that the law says you have to reveal the source. The funding, the funder. So why hide it, or why not say it? So I'm not sure. Maybe the donor who gave money said, no, keep my name out of it. Maybe the money was coming from don't know where. I have no clue. So I'm not sure whether I answered your question as directly as I can.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
那刚刚丽云老师也有请问，就是把记就说您的那个独立网你怎么样维持它在政府控制跟你们想要独立报道这样之间的这样的一个平衡呢？就是您自己的这个独立网如何去在政府的控管之下，要达到你们自己的专业的目的呢？
Again, a very tough question, but because I've been involved in the Independent, I can tell you this. Most important thing is to make sure that you report responsibly. I think that's a key. Not easy to do, it's not easy to do, especially with people who are very young. So the people who are running the Independent, the editors, must make sure that they scrutinize the copy closely, ask the right questions, and make sure that you get your facts right. I mean, that's basic journalism, right? But that doesn't mean that you will survive, That doesn't mean you will survive. And secondly, from a business perspective, how do you make yourself different from, let's say, MediaCorp and or the Straits Times? You have to make it different. If not, why should I buy you? So you have to unearth information. As an example, I just give you quickly as an example, right? Our foreign minister visited Malaysia, and there was a picture of him, Mr. Vivian Balakrishnan, with the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak. Now, if I, at this moment, was running the Independent, in charge of the Independent, I will write that story up, right? Not so much to provide as balanced a picture as possible of that meeting and why that meeting happened. I read a couple of reports from Malaysia, which really rubbished the Singapore foreign minister for meeting him, because saying that Najib Razak is a convict, he's waiting for his appeal. So how can the leader of a country go and visit him? But politics is more than that, right? And if I were in charge of that story, I will try and get people to talk. Why did Vivian Balakrishnan, the foreign minister, meet him? Why did he allow a picture to be taken and released to the press? There must be something significant about it. So this is where the point I made about contextual reporting. Contextual reporting in this case will mean to look at when Najib was the prime minister and how he and the Singapore prime minister were very close, and each of them were what I would call deal makers. It was at that time when we signed a deal to have this high-speed railway running from Singapore right up to the north. And then when Mahathir came in, he disbanded the idea. So from a purely Singapore's interest, maybe that meeting was important, right? I'm not saying that. I mean, if I were in the Singapore government, I won't allow that meeting to happen. We can talk to Najib in many other private functions, right? So if you examine the circumstances, why the meeting took place, and write a story, I think you're fine. I think you're fine, right? But I don't know whether the online media will do that, because they want to churn out stories on a daily basis, right? This story might take you 3, 4, 5 days.
张老师，我们还有没有时间？
谢谢。好，我们的时间的关系哈，那非常感谢。可以在那个巴吉先生，其实我想他的重点大家已经很清楚了，如何即使是在网络时代里面哈，也应该这个查核事实哈，然后呢，好的新闻媒体要怎么样存活下去，要有脉络的分析，要能够有好的人才，然后事实上也需要各方面的这种资金或是等等资源的挹注然后做一个负责任的媒体，因为它对国家发展对于这个社会其实真的太重要了。那我们非常感谢巴吉先生给我们提供的这些很宝贵的、很资深的这种经验那我们这一场就先到这边结束因为下面一场5分钟之后就要开始。好，那我们就到这边，非常谢谢各位的参与提问，以及巴吉先生特别跟我们连线报道，谢谢。